It was the middle of winter, just days before Christmas. I was living with my girlfriend, I'll call her Anna, and since both of us were pretty far from our families, the holidays usually meant long road trips. That year, we were heading to Anna's parents' place for Christmas. The drive was just shy of 11 hours. Normally it wasn't terrible, but looking back, I think we'd just been lucky on past trips. We crammed our bags and suitcases into the trunk and hit the road on Christmas Eve, planning to arrive late at night so we could spend the entire next day with her family. The first few hours passed quietly. Most people had already finished traveling for the holidays, so the highways were almost empty. After a while, I pulled into a small middle-of-nowhere gas station to fill up and stretch my legs before pushing on. Not a single other car was parked there. Anna stayed in the car with the heater running while I went inside to pay and grab a couple of drinks. The wind cut straight through me, and the parking lot clearly hadn't been plowed. I had to push through nearly 6 inches of snow just to reach the building. When I opened the door and stepped inside, the first thing that hit me was how silent it was. I didn't see anyone at all. I stood there for a moment, scanning the place, assuming whoever worked there was in the back and would show up once I got to the counter. I grabbed a couple of drinks and waited, but no one came. I called out a quick hello and even leaned toward the back room, but there was no movement, no voices, nothing. That's when it really hit me that the store might be completely empty, even though the lights were on and the doors were wide open. It felt off. After waiting a bit, I put the drinks back and headed outside, figuring I could at least fill up the tank. The second I stepped out, my stomach dropped. There was a man standing right next to my girlfriend's window. He was knocking on the glass, leaning in like he was trying to get her attention. He was wrapped up in thick winter clothes, so I couldn't make out much about him. I rushed toward the car, and the moment he noticed me, he immediately stepped back and started walking away fast. I reached the car just in time to watch him head toward the road. It was obvious he wasn't some employee from the station, which only made things worse. I jumped inside and asked Anna what had just happened. She looked shaken. She told me the guy appeared out of nowhere the second I went inside and kept motioning for her to roll the window down, knocking again and again. He never explained why and didn't say anything else at all. Naturally, the whole thing rattled her. She trusted her instincts, kept the doors locked, the windows up, and didn't acknowledge him at all. I didn't waste any time either. I started the car and pulled out of there immediately, hoping we'd come across another gas station soon. That place just felt wrong. The air around it was unsettling, and neither of us wanted to stick around any longer than we already had. Because we left so fast, we were forced to take a detour. The next station on our original route was way too far, and we weren't about to risk running out of gas in the middle of nowhere with the temperature dropping. From that point on, everything started falling apart. Between the detour and the snow slowing us down, we lost a lot of time. It was deep into the night, and we still had about 4 hours left to go. We were exhausted, so we decided it made more sense to stop somewhere cheap, sleep for a few hours, and finish the drive early Christmas morning instead. Anna called her family to explain what was going on, and I spotted a motel sitting just off the highway a few miles ahead. The neon 24/7 sign was still lit, but the lot was completely empty. I remember thinking how strange it was. Christmas Eve isn't exactly a popular night to stay at a roadside motel. I pulled in and walked up to the entrance, feeling a bit of relief when I saw a clerk behind the desk. I booked a small room for the night, then went back out to grab our bags and get settled. We were beyond tired, and within half an hour of lying down, we were both completely out. I set an alarm for 2 a.m., figuring that would give us enough time to get back on the road and still reach her family's place around 6 in the morning. Both of us were completely wiped out, and I don't think either of us stirred once during the few hours we slept. When the alarm finally went off, I dragged myself out of bed, barely awake and already dreading the cold. I let Anna sleep a little longer while I gathered our things, then stepped outside and tossed everything into the back seat. The motel lot looked exactly the same as it had the night before, still empty, like no one else had shown up at all. The cold was brutal, the wind was howling, and even though it wasn't snowing heavily, loose snow was getting whipped up off the ground, making it hard to see clearly. I hurried back inside, woke Anna, and told her it was time to leave. Then I headed toward the front office to check out. When I stepped into the small office area, the clerk was gone. I paused, immediately reminded of the gas station earlier, except this time I knew for a fact someone had been there before. I moved closer to the desk and called out, but there was still no response. That's when I noticed papers scattered across the floor behind the counter, like whoever had been working there had rushed out without a second thought. A heavy sense of dread hit me all at once. I backed away from the desk and quickly headed outside to get Anna. I ran down the row of motel doors, threw ours open, and told Anna we needed to get out immediately. No explanations. She didn't question it. She grabbed her coat and rushed straight to the car while I collected whatever was still inside. When I got behind the wheel, my hands were visibly shaking as I started the engine, struggling just to pull us through the snow-covered lot. As I eased back onto the highway, I passed the side of the building, and that's when I saw him. For just a split second, I caught a glimpse of a man standing alongside the motel. But that was all it took. Same heavy winter jacket, same build. It was the exact same guy from the gas station. That was enough to confirm that something was seriously wrong. I floored it onto the highway, and Anna immediately called 911. About 15 minutes later, we met up with police at another gas station. That's when things went from unsettling to outright terrifying. One of the officers pointed out how unlikely it was that someone could have followed us that closely without us realizing it. He took a look around the car and then found it. Tucked up under the rear wheel well was a tracker. The officer explained that the guy must have planted it when he approached our car back at the gas station. And in that moment, everything finally made horrifying sense. It took more than an hour for officers to check both locations, the gas station and the motel. When they finally reported back, Anna and I went completely numb. Both employees were officially missing. That's when it became impossible to deny that the man following us was involved somehow. The only explanation that made sense to me was that he'd already done something to the gas station worker before we ever showed up. And when I walked in and noticed how empty the place was, maybe he thought I'd seen more than I should have. From there, he followed us, likely planning to make sure we never told anyone. I can't say for certain because they never caught him. The only thing they had was a grainy, almost useless image from a gas station security camera. That was it. And that's how we ended up spending Christmas morning, giving statements to police and trying to process what had almost happened. We couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of the week, but eventually everything went quiet. No updates, no follow-ups. To this day, I've never heard anything about the gas station clerk or the motel worker being found. As far as I know, they're still missing. And what really chills me is knowing how close Anna and I came to being added to that list, if we hadn't trusted our instincts and gotten out when we did. Christmas of 2019 was the year my two best friends, Mark and Tyler, and I decided to ditch the usual family plans and do our own thing. We were all in our early 20s, living far away from home, burned out from work, and honestly exhausted by life in general. The idea of escaping for a few days and doing absolutely nothing sounded perfect. We ended up renting a cabin about an hour outside the city, sitting halfway into the woods. It was technically part of a neighborhood, but that was a stretch, maybe 10 other cabins total, each one spaced about a mile apart. We arrived on Christmas Eve with the car packed full of food, snacks and beer. Mark even brought his Xbox, so the night quickly turned into drinking and playing games until around 2 in the morning. It definitely wasn't some cozy movie-style Christmas, but we were having a great time. By the time we finally headed to our rooms, I fell asleep almost instantly. The cabin was freezing, and like most old wooden places, it constantly creaked and shifted, but I was too tired to care. That was true. Right up until I woke up. It was still completely dark outside, probably around 3 or 4 in the morning. I didn't know the exact time, only that I'd been asleep for a while, and something had pulled me out of it. I lay there listening, my heart slowly speeding up as I realized what I was hearing. Soft, deliberate footsteps coming from the main living area. The footsteps weren't normal walking. They were careful, deliberate, like someone was trying not to wake anyone. I blinked a few times, still half asleep, and assumed it was one of the guys, maybe heading for water or the bathroom. I stayed still, listening, expecting the sound to move down the hall or stop at a door, but it didn't. It stayed right in the same spot. The creaking floorboards near the front of the cabin made it sound almost like the steps were pacing. I thought about calling out, asking if everything was okay, but I didn't want to yell across the dark room or risk running into whoever it was. Eventually, the footsteps just stopped. The cabin went quiet again. I rolled over and fell back asleep. When morning came, sunlight poured through the big living room windows, and both guys were already up and sitting there. The first thing I did was jokingly ask who had been sneaking around at 4 in the morning. I expected some dumb excuse. Maybe someone lost their phone or got up drunk, but instead, both of them just stared at me with the same confused look. Mark said, "Dude, we all went to bed at 2. And Tyler shook his head. "I didn't get up once." At first, I laughed it off. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe I'd half-dreamed the sound and my brain filled in the rest. But then my eyes drifted toward the front door. Both locks were undone. Not just the deadbolt, but the handle lock too. Completely unlocked. The door itself was still closed, but neither lock was turned. I asked if either of them had stepped outside that morning. They both said no, and when I pointed at the door, I watched the realization hit them. Their expressions changed instantly. That's when it really sank in that I might not have been imagining those footsteps at all. We were all pretty confident we'd locked the door the night before. Still, after a moment, Tyler tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had rattled it loose, or the door was old and didn't latch properly. The usual explanations people reach for when they don't want to think too hard about the alternative. I think we all wanted it to be nothing, and because of that, we eventually let it go. We made breakfast, kept our winter coats on because the cabin was still freezing, and spent the afternoon just hanging out, playing video games, watching movies, and relaxing. We exchanged the small, crappy Christmas gifts we'd gotten each other and FaceTimed our families back home. It was snowing heavily, and the cold was brutal, so any plans we had to go hiking were completely off the table. As the day went on, the unlocked door and the footsteps faded into just a strange, unexplained moment. But as night started creeping back in, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. We were all crammed into the living room, playing some ridiculous party game on the Xbox, yelling and laughing at each other like idiots. Every now and then, I caught myself staring out the window. I hadn't really paid attention to it before, but now the darkness outside felt too close. It was like someone could be standing just a few feet away, watching us, and we wouldn't have any idea. During the day, I knew there were trees right outside, maybe 10 feet from the window, but at night, the blackness swallowed everything. I didn't want to bring up the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. I didn't want to ruin the fun, and honestly, I didn't have any real reason to feel scared. I never saw anything. Eventually, because we'd stayed up so late the night before, Mark called it quits around midnight and went to bed. Tyler and I stayed in the living room for another half hour, talking, before finally heading to our rooms. Lying in bed, I couldn't sleep right away. I had no idea what time it was, but it felt like I'd been awake for an hour or so. There were no curtains or blinds on the window next to my bed, and the emptiness of the dark outside made my skin crawl. And then it started again, the same faint, careful footsteps coming from the front of the cabin, right in the living room. I sat straight up in bed, forcing myself to stay perfectly still as I listened. This time, I knew it wasn't one of my friends. If either of them had gotten up, I would have heard their door open and their steps in the hallway. So I focused, trying to figure out if it was just the cabin settling, or if someone was actually moving around. After listening for a bit, there was no doubt in my mind. It was footsteps. Whoever it was sounded like they were slowly pacing back and forth. My nerves were shot, but I finally worked up the courage to get out of bed and confront whoever was there. I was just reaching for my bedroom door when the sound shifted. The footsteps left the living room and entered the hallway. They moved closer, step by step, coming straight toward me. I stood frozen as they passed right by my door and continued down the hall, stopping near what I believed was Mark's room. Then everything went silent. After several long, tense seconds, I carefully wrapped my fingers around the door handle and cracked the door open just enough to look out, making sure it didn't make a sound. Standing there in the hallway was a man, huge, at least 6.5 feet tall, with long hair and a thick beard. He wasn't moving. He was facing Mark's bedroom door, completely still, almost like he was listening. I didn't dare stare for long. I pulled back but left the door slightly open so it wouldn't click shut. At that point, my mind went blank. I had no idea what to do or how to get us out of this. And then, maybe 20 seconds later, the hallway floor creaked softly, and before I could even react, my door was suddenly shoved open. The man stood in my doorway, towering over me, eyes wide and expressionless. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but he didn't even flinch. Almost immediately, Mark and Tyler burst out of their rooms. I couldn't get a clear look, but Tyler spotted the guy and tried to confront him. The moment he did, the man, massive and powerful, slammed Tyler into the wall and threw him to the floor. Mark just froze, probably in shock at what had happened. Then, without even attempting to fight the three of us, the man bolted. He ran straight out of the cabin, vanishing into the forest beyond. We hurried to lock every door and window and called the police. For over 20 minutes we waited, gripping whatever makeshift weapons we could find, kitchen knives, an iron fireplace rod, half expecting him to come back. But he never did. In the end, there were no clear answers. Most of the responsibility fell on the cabin owner since his property had been broken into. What the man actually wanted, whether it was something from the cabin or someone inside, remains a mystery. Our best guess is that he might have been searching for the owner specifically, not realizing it was a rental. It could explain why he stared at me, saw all of us, and then didn't escalate further. But that's just a theory. He could have easily intended to hurt us and decided to run when he realized there were three of us. Whatever the truth, we're just relieved it never turned into a full-on fight. Honestly, I have no idea who would have come out on top if it had. This was back in 2016. Due to work, family being far away, and a bunch of scheduling conflicts, this ended up being one of the rare Christmases I spent completely alone. I had a cozy little house in a nice neighborhood. Being alone on the holiday wasn't ideal, but I actually enjoyed it, either lounging inside watching Christmas movies or going for a walk if the weather allowed. That year, Christmas morning started off peaceful. I woke up to soft snow drifting down outside, nothing heavy yet. I made myself some coffee, threw Home Alone on in the background, and had breakfast on the couch. It was quiet, simple, and honestly, kind of perfect. By noon, the snow was picking up a bit, but still far from a real storm. I decided to take a short walk before it got worse. The neighborhood had that classic holiday charm, lights twinkling on houses, wreaths hanging on doors, and not a single car in sight. The streets were calm and empty. I only passed one person the entire walk, a guy shoveling his driveway a couple of blocks over. Other than that, the neighborhood was silent. When I got back home, the wind was starting to pick up, swirling snow across the street in little spirals. The forecast had warned the storm would hit in the evening, and it looked like it was arriving early, but I didn't care. I had food, blankets, and movies, so staying inside sounded perfect. Then the storm hit much faster than expected. Around 5 o'clock, it went from a gentle snowfall to near whiteout conditions in less than half an hour. The wind was strong enough to shake the windows. It wasn't enough to really worry me, but it was a clear reminder that I shouldn't be venturing outside again. With all the noise from the wind and snow, the house almost felt unnaturally quiet. I made myself dinner and kept the movies going, trying to ignore the storm outside. By 8 o'clock, the storm had grown loud enough to nearly drown out the TV. I could hear things banging and thumping around outside, branches or maybe loose Christmas decorations, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Then, about an hour later, around 9, I heard it, the first knock at the front door. It wasn't loud or frantic, just a single deliberate knock, sharp enough to cut through the wind. Definitely a knock, not the random thumps I'd been hearing earlier. I froze on the couch. Nobody ever came to my door on Christmas, and nobody should even be out in weather like this. I muted the TV and just waited, listening. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then came another knock, 3 this time. I got up, careful not to go close enough to the side window for anyone outside to see me. I didn't say a word or touch the blinds. My door didn't have a peephole, so the side windows were the only way to see out. And of course, if I looked, they could see me too. I stayed like that, tense and frozen, until my nerves finally caught up with me. I couldn't hear anything over the storm anymore, and whoever it was didn't knock again. I figured it was best to just leave it alone. There was no way I was opening that door. After a while, I forced myself back onto the couch, still on edge, but trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I turned the movie back on, but maybe 5 minutes passed before I heard something else. I paused the TV immediately and listened. It was faint, almost easy to miss, but it sounded like something being dragged through the snow. Slow, deliberate. The sound moved from the front of the house, tracing its way around the exterior. I followed it with my eyes, heart pounding, until it reached the back of the house and stopped. That back door didn't have any curtains or blinds. The thought of even peeking around the corner made my stomach tighten. Then I heard it again, 3 knocks. My body felt cold as I stood up and carefully leaned just enough around the corner to see the back door. The moment I did, I locked eyes with someone staring straight in at me. It was so dark outside that I could barely make out the man's shape, but I saw enough. I immediately pulled back out of sight. What was he doing here? That was it. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Even if nothing more came of it, this was beyond unsettling. I stayed in the living room while talking to the operator, honestly too scared to move and risk being seen again. There was something about his eyes that I couldn't shake. It was deeply disturbing. I'd been on the phone for maybe 2 or 3 minutes when I heard a faint scraping noise. Before my brain could even process what it was, there was a sudden, violent crash against the back door. Glass shattered. Pieces of the door slammed inward and hit the floor. The wind rushed into the house instantly, swallowing every other sound. I immediately assumed he'd made it inside, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. Nothing at all beyond the roar of the wind. There was no chance I was going to look. I dropped down and hid behind the couch. It wasn't exactly a great hiding spot, but my mind was racing, and it was the only thing I could think to do. Not being able to see anything and not being able to hear anything except the storm made the next 5 minutes feel unbearable. Every second dragged on. I was convinced he was moving through the house, either searching for me or grabbing whatever he could find, but I didn't dare shift or check. Then, finally, I heard something different, knocking at the front door, followed by a police officer shouting through the wind. I jumped up and ran to the door, letting the officer inside. By then, the man was gone. The only sign he'd ever been there were wet shoe prints scattered through parts of the house. I don't know if he'd been looking for me specifically or not, but it seemed like he broke in, barely searched, and then left just as quickly. His footprints in the snow led toward the open field behind my house, and within minutes, the blizzard had completely erased them. Even after the police left, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, with every light in the house turned on, listening to the wind slam against what remained of the back door. When the storm finally eased up, the silence that followed felt even worse. Every small creak made me tense up. The officers came back after sunrise to check things over again. They told me they'd keep an eye on the area, but with the storm having wiped away nearly everything, there wasn't much more they could do. Before they left, one of them said something that stuck with me ever since. He explained that during storms like that, it isn't unusual for people to wander around, checking for unlocked houses, knowing the weather will hide their tracks. But when I mentioned the knocking and how the man had circled my house, the officer just shook his head. He said some people knock first to see who responds, or if anyone does at all. And by not answering the front door, then later letting him see me at the back, I'd essentially confirmed that I was alone. I'd never really thought about how every small decision I made that night slowly led to what happened. I was incredibly lucky the man didn't push harder to find me, because if he had, I honestly don't like to think about how that night might have ended.